There's nothing like a life on the open waves. Being out on the sea gives you a sense of freedom and liberty that's hard to replicate anywhere else. That's why cruise ship holidays are so popular. Out at sea, you're free of responsibilities and all the everyday stresses and strains of real life. You're also a long way from help if things go wrong. Sometimes ships go missing. Other times the ship is still there, but the crew has disappeared. The sea has a habit of keeping its secrets, and those secrets can turn into great mysteries. The sinking of the Russian trawler Tucan in 1967 remains one of the country's greatest maritime mysteries. Carrying a top-secret cargo from Kaliningrad to Cuba in February of that year, the trawler sailed into a storm as it entered the Skagerrak Strait at 20 minutes to midnight. 5 hours later, the entire vessel was lost beneath the waves. The official version of events is that the trawler had a design flaw, which meant that hatches in the stern opened, letting in water. Those on board tell a different story, though. They say the vessel was struck by an unknown force at 2:30 that morning. The shipwreck is only 120 feet beneath the water, so the matter could easily be resolved if someone wished to investigate, but nobody ever has. Was this really a simple accident, or could the vessel have been deliberately sunk because of its mysterious cargo? The 2011 Fukushima earthquake in Japan wreaked havoc upon both land and sea, tearing apart a nuclear power station and causing a tsunami off the coast. In the process, it sent the Japanese fishing ship Rio Yoon Maru on an unplanned final voyage. The boat had been permanently moored and was to be sold for scrap, but the tsunami broke its chains and sent it sailing away across the ocean. A year later, in March 2012, the ghost ship appeared off the coast of Alaska and was intercepted by the U.S. Coast Guard. Salvaging the stricken vessel proved to be impossible, and so it had to be sunk to avoid becoming a hazard to other vessels in the busy shipping lane it had drifted into. That's a sad end for a brave ship that crossed a vast ocean without a crew. French diesel-electric submarine Minerva was conducting the type of journey it had completed many times over its career when it disappeared without a trace on January 27, 1968. Just before 8 a.m. that morning, it radioed a passing aircraft to confirm that it would be back at its berth within the hour. But it never made it home. The weather was terrible on that day, but the hardy ship and her experienced captain should have been able to deal with choppy waters easily. A high-profile rescue mission followed, with famous French adventurer Jacques Cousteau heading up the operation. But despite searching for over a year, not one single clue to her location could be found. It's as if she'd simply vanished into thin air. The Duc de Danzig was a privateer vessel, a ship that was operated privately but licensed by the state to carry out raids on foreign boats and loot them, often destroying the ships once they were done. Such a ship is likely to become targeted itself, and that may have been the eventual fate of the Duc de Danzig. She was last heard of on 13th of December 1811, bound for the Caribbean. After that, she doesn't appear in the records of another dock or ship ever again. Rumors about it drifting aimlessly in the water persisted for years, but no evidence has ever emerged. It seems likely that the hunter eventually became the hunted. Information about the SS Ourang Medan is so hard to come by that some people refuse to believe she ever existed at all. If she did, the story goes like this. The American vessel Silver Star intercepted an SOS transmission from the Dutch merchant ship Ourang Medan in June 1947, stating there was an emergency on board. The Silver Star rushed to the scene only to find that there were no surviving crew and no signs of damage to the ship. Before they could investigate further, a fire broke out in the cargo hold and forced the crew to retreat before the entire ship exploded and sank. Some say the Ourang Medan encountered something supernatural. Others say she was carrying a cargo of sulfuric acid and other chemicals, which poisoned the crew and then ignited. According to the Lloyd's shipping register, no ship with this name ever existed at all. When the dreadnought battleship Navarro Sisk sank in 1955, she took a lot of history with her. She was once an Italian ship named Giulio Cesare and found her way into Russian ownership as part of the war reparations after 1945. The Russians were using her as a training vessel and had anchored her at Sevastopol for a refit when she suddenly exploded without warning, sinking instantly. No cause has ever been determined for the explosion. It's possible that the ship's anchor had struck an unexploded German mine left over from the war, which would have been an incredible slice of bad luck. Others believe that Italian frogmen sank her deliberately in a revenge mission, even though almost a decade had passed since hostilities ended. The wreckage was raised from the seabed, but the old veteran ship had to be scrapped. K-278 Komsomolets was the only Project 685 Plavnik nuclear-powered submarine of the Soviet Navy. On the 4th of August 1984, K-278 reached a record submergence depth of 3,350 feet in the Norwegian Sea. K-278 had a double hull, the inner one being composed of titanium, which gave her an operating depth far greater than that of the best submarines at that time. On the 7th of April 1989, at a depth of 1,099 feet, fire broke out in the engine room. The Komsomolets was able to surface after the fire started, and remained afloat for approximately 5 hours before sinking. In the end, the boat sank and is currently resting on the floor of the Barents Strait. Why fire broke out and how one of the most modern submarines could have sunk because of this remains one of the biggest mysteries that still has no answer. Science fiction fans will love the story of the American Navy vessel USS Eldridge. With American boats being lost in battle on a regular basis during 1942, scientists were looking at radical new ways to make the fleet safe. Legend has it that Albert Einstein was drafted in to work on technology which would make ships invisible by cloaking them in electromagnetic fog. The top-secret operation was codenamed the Philadelphia Experiment, and the Eldridge was the test subject. Eyewitnesses swear that the technology worked, but also caused the entire ship to be briefly teleported to Virginia before arriving back in Philadelphia, with the crew on board driven insane by the experience. Of course, no footage of the experiments exists, and it seems unlikely, but why would researchers and scientists make up such a strange story? Remember the French submarine Minerva from earlier on? Well, perhaps diesel-electric submarines were cursed, because the Soviet submarine S-117 is another that belongs to the fleet of the missing. The vessel was performing training exercises when it lost contact with its neighboring ships and disappeared in December 1952. It had reported the failure of its diesel engines 7 hours before it vanished, but later radioed through to its base that the problem was solved. It was never heard from again. As with the Minerva, a huge search operation was carried out, which lasted well into 1953, but had to be abandoned when no progress was made. The submarine is still officially listed as missing. The possibility that it struck a sea mine cannot be ruled out, but such an incident would normally leave traces, like diesel and wreckage floating on the water. In this case, there was nothing. Many people are familiar with the legend of the Marie Celeste, but far fewer are familiar with the tale of the Yoyita, a merchant vessel which was found floating damaged and crewless in the South Pacific in 1955. The ship's engines had failed, but the fact that the hull was lined with cork meant that the vessel was virtually unsinkable, which the captain would have known. Why then had the ship been abandoned? All the lifeboats and safety equipment were gone, along with the logbook and 4 tons of cargo, but there was no sign of the crew on any of the nearby islands, and no explanation as to why they wouldn't have waited on board the drifting vessel to be rescued. The Yoyita was successfully salvaged and repaired, sailing on for many years, but ran aground twice and was eventually scuttled after gaining a reputation as an unlucky ship. The legend of the Bermuda Triangle is well known and widely feared by travelers. Countless planes and ships have been lost in the area over the years, one of which was the SS Marine Sulphur Queen. an American tanker. On the 4th of February 1963, it was off the coast of Florida, sending out a radio message to confirm its location and its travel plans. By the 6th of February, when it failed to turn up, it was confirmed as missing. Minor debris and items from the ship were recovered several days later in the Straits of Florida, but there was no sign of the hulk of the vessel. A later inquiry established that the ship was in poor condition and should never have been allowed to sail, especially with cargo as dangerous as sulfuric acid. But the lack of wreckage is curious. The incident resulted in all ships of the Marine Sulphur Queen's class being retired from dangerous missions. The USS Thresher was the first of her class and the pride of the U.S. Navy's nuclear submarine fleet when she launched in 1960. A mere 3 years later, she was lost below the waves while performing standard deep dive testing operations off the coast of Cape Cod. She managed to call through to her companion vessel, the Skylark, for help, sending a mysterious and garbled radio message that contained the number 900, and then all fell silent. It's believed that a pipe joint ruptured in the engine room, and an attempt to blow ballast to come back to the surface failed because the water in the pipes had frozen solid. Having sunk below its intended diving depth, all evidence suggests that the Thresher completely imploded in less than 1/100th of a second. Cruise ships are supposed to be glamorous, and the Lis Above Orlova, named in honor of the Russian film star, was certainly a luxurious way to see the Antarctic during her years of service. All that glamour was long forgotten by the time she was left drifting in the North Atlantic Ocean in 2013 as a ghost ship. She'd been impounded in Newfoundland in 2012 due to unpaid debts, and was to be sold for scrap so the debts could be honored. It would seem the ship herself decided she didn't want that fate. While being towed to the Dominican Republic for the scrapping to begin, she broke free of her tow rope and drifted away, just outside Canada's international waters. 2 months later, she was sighted off the coast of Ireland, crewless and traveling the world alone. For all anyone knows, she may still be out there. If you speak to experienced sailors who work regularly off the coast of Seattle, they may have a thing or two to tell you about strange apparitions they've seen out at sea, especially the ghost of the SS Valencia, a passenger steamliner which sank there after striking a reef in 1906. The mighty vessel struggled against the tide for hours before finally submerging, despite a fleet of rescue ships, including the SS Topeka, doing their best to assist. Rumored sightings of the ship have persisted for over 100 years, helped along by the fact that a lifeboat from the old lost vessel was found floating in the water in good condition a full 27 years after its mothership went down. How had it survived for nearly 3 decades drifting in the open water? Perhaps it was launched from the ghost of the original boat. The most legendary and persistent ghost ship of them all has to be the SS Baychimo, a former trading vessel which once served a perilous and icy route between Alaska and Vancouver. On one such mission, she got stuck fast in the ice and had to be abandoned. The crew camped out nearby, waiting for the ice to thaw so they could board her and sail her away. Unfortunately, a blizzard came, and by the time it cleared, the Baychimo was nowhere to be seen. That was back in 1931. Since then, she's been spotted countless times, most recently in 1969, still close to the coastline of Alaska, where it would seem she'd still dutifully been touring the coastline without a crew for almost 40 years. No wreckage has ever been found, so it's possible that this ghost ship could still be out there, waiting for her crew to come and steer her home. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, and you will be the first to know when a new video comes out. Thank you for watching, and see you soon.